I still remember the exact moment I heard the sickening crunch of shattered glass. It was dawn, and I'd just poured myself a cup of coffee, standing by my living room window to admire the pink glow of sunrise reflecting on my newly installed solar panels. Then, from somewhere near the side of my house, came a series of sharp pops followed by a dull thud, like something heavy colliding with metal. My stomach twisted. I set down my coffee so fast it splashed onto the floor, but I barely noticed. I was already halfway out the door. Before I continue, let me give you some context. My name is Arthur Vance. I've lived in this quiet community for a little over a year, ever since I retired from working 3 decades in electrical engineering. I felt drawn to the crisp, tree-lined streets and the sense of neighborly calm that seemed to hover around every picket fence. It took a chunk of my life savings, but I purchased a house with a sizable yard, perfect for fulfilling an old dream of becoming more energy independent. That dream came to life through an array of top-tier solar panels I had mounted just a week ago. Except that morning, the neighborly calm was about to be shattered literally. I sprinted out the side door, only to find 2 large panels cracked, the tempered glass spiderwebbed like a windshield after a rock crash. Pieces of black photovoltaic cells were strewn about the grass, glittering in the early sunlight. Standing over them was Brenda Sharp, self-appointed president of the neighborhood HOA. She was holding what appeared to be a collapsible baton, the kind police use. "Brenda," I shouted, horrified. "What on earth do you think you're doing?" She spun on her heel, flipping that baton closed with a swift snap. She was wearing sweatpants, an old t-shirt, and an expression so smug that I felt my throat tighten. Brenda had short hair, frosted to a brassy blonde, and the corners of her thin lips were perpetually tugged down as though she'd never found a single thing to smile about in her life. "It's a mess. Sharp," she corrected me, stepping forward with a sneer. "You can't have these hideous panels visible from the street. They violate the historical aesthetics clause in our bylaws. They're not even facing the street. I see that. And last time I checked, we're not in a historic district." We'd had a spat 2 days earlier when she first noticed the solar installation. She'd marched up to my door brandishing a thick binder of HOA guidelines. I calmly explained to her that my permit for the installation had been approved by the city, who told me in writing that the HOA had no right to override municipal rules on renewable energy. She left in a huff, threatening fines and consequences, but I never dreamed she'd take it to this level of destruction. Brenda pursed her lips. "We've kept this neighborhood's traditional look for decades, and we're not about to let some new retiree bring down property values. Not on my watch." My stomach clenched. I'm not a small man 6 feet tall and still relatively fit from my years spent loading heavy electrical equipment, but the sight of that baton combined with Brenda's unwavering, laser-focused scowl made me uneasy. "I demand you put that thing away and get off my property," I said. To my surprise, she actually complied, tucking the baton into a small utility pouch she wore. But her eyes stayed locked on mine, brimming with animosity. "You can't get rid of me. This is the HOA's jurisdiction, and I am the HOA. You'll remove these unsightly panels, or I'll remove them for you again." She paused, towing a shattered panel like she was stomping out a bug. "Oh, and trust me, you don't want to rack up fines. You'll regret it." I could feel my own anger climbing to a dangerous peak, but something told me to keep my cool. On top of it all, I realized how deeply Brenda misunderstood who she was dealing with. Because I wasn't just a random homeowner. I was the man who had quietly purchased the underlying power contracts that supplied this entire neighborhood a strategic venture I'd made a few months earlier. Let me explain how that happened. During my career, I specialized in designing and managing electrical grids for municipalities and private developments. When I settled here, I discovered the entire neighborhood got its electricity from a small co-op that was running in the red. At a discount, I bought a controlling share. It was a niche investment, but I believed I could steer it toward profitability. Since I was new to the area, I kept this purchase quiet. No reason to flaunt it. Plus, folks often get skittish when they learn one neighbor effectively owns the local power distribution. Brenda, of course, had no idea. And as she threatened me that morning, claiming the HOA would go after me, I had to bite my tongue to keep from blurting out my secret. But the damage she'd inflicted on my property was major. 2 solar panels lay destroyed, thousands of dollars of equipment literally hammered to bits. The bitter taste of betrayal rose in my mouth. The fleeting sense of neighborly warmth I once harbored was gone. I knelt by the broken panels, my heart pounding. Brenda turned away and stalked back toward the sidewalk, apparently unbothered. "We'll see how you handle the violation notice," she shot over her shoulder, leaving me with the awful aftermath. What she couldn't know was that I held far more literal electrical power than she imagined. As I gently gathered the shards of my once pristine panels, a plan began to form. Brenda could threaten me all she wanted, but in the end, she needed me more than I needed her. If this was how she wanted to play, I had every intention of fighting back. Little did she know, she was crossing a line she'd regret for a very, very long time. "I'm sorry, but the HOA guidelines clearly state you must maintain conformity with the established exterior designs of the neighborhood." That was the voice of Stephen Miller, the neighborhood's property manager, reading from a piece of paper. He sat behind a cheap laminate desk in a cramped HOA office, his cheeks glowing pink from embarrassment. If he noticed the irony that he was lecturing an expert on energy systems about exterior design, he gave no sign. Sitting across from him, I forced myself to keep calm. The only reason I'd agreed to this meeting was as a courtesy. After Brenda's stunt, I filed a report with the local police, who, to my disappointment, seemed reluctant to do much beyond issuing a half-hearted warning for vandalism. The officer, short and broad-shouldered, basically told me that unless I had clear video evidence of Brenda's actions, it would be an uphill battle. So there I was, at the so-called mediation table, listening to Stephen recite the same set of regulations Brenda had waved in my face. Except now they wanted to bury me in fines, citing alterations without prior approval, installation of non-compliant structures, and visual disruption. I found the word disruption particularly galling. "Brenda physically destroyed my panels," I said, cutting in as Stephen rattled on. "Are you planning to address that at all?" He lowered the paper. "We're still investigating, but Ms. Sharp insists she simply removed a portion that was violating HOA bylaws. She claimed she only lightly tapped them with her baton because she feared they were dangerously loose." I nearly choked. Dangerously loose? She was whacking away like she was trying to crack open a coconut. Stephen blinked, sweat forming along his receding hairline. He was a middle manager through and through, more comfortable with spreadsheets than confrontation. "The HOA's formal stance is that you violated the approval process and mounted solar panels that are visible from the road." "They're in my backyard, Stephen," I said evenly, resisting the urge to raise my voice. "Unless you stand on the sidewalk with a telescope, it's not visible. And the city approved them." He shrugged helplessly. "Our guidelines specifically say that any exterior change must be reviewed before installation." "I'm sorry, but the penalty for ignoring this is significant. We have the legal right to impose fines or even place a lien on your property if you don't comply." My jaw tightened. It seemed that every official channel had been captured by the notoriously petty HOA leadership. I recalled the whispered stories from other neighbors. People who tried to repaint their house a slightly different color only to face fines in the thousands of dollars. Or an older widow who'd wanted to install a small wheelchair ramp only to be told it didn't meet the architectural theme. Sighing, I folded my arms. "And if I appeal this to the city?" Stephen gave me a fleeting look of sympathy. "You could try, but historically, the HOA's rights are pretty broad. The municipal office seldom gets involved unless it's a direct violation of energy regulation. And to them, your solar setup might be in a gray area, especially if the HOA claims you circumvented their process." I wanted to tell him about my controlling stake in the local power co-op, but a part of me felt that unveiling that card too early might jeopardize my advantage. Instead, I concluded the meeting abruptly. "Fine," I snapped. "Send me your official notice. I'll have my attorney review it." Standing, I gave him a curt nod and left the room. Outside, the late morning sun sparkled off the row of identical houses, each sporting the same shade of off-white siding. The hush of manicured lawns felt oppressive. It seemed the neighborhood's curb appeal was more important to Brenda than respecting personal property or the law. I marched toward my truck, fists clenched. Then I saw her. Brenda, perched in her own golf cart parked near the entrance. She was chatting with an older couple who looked decidedly uncomfortable. Her gaze flicked to me, then away, as though I was beneath her notice. Part of me wanted to stride over and demand an apology, but I had a bigger plan in mind. I drove home, called my insurance agent, and got the ball rolling on a vandalism claim. Maybe it would cover at least some of the repair costs for the panels. Then, I turned my attention to the pile of documents I'd kept regarding the co-op. In short, the community's electricity was supplied through a partnership contract that I'd purchased majority shares in. The contract guaranteed service to the neighborhood at a fixed rate, an incredible deal for them, as it was locked in from decades ago. However, there was a clause stating that if the HOA or any significant portion of homeowners knowingly undermined local energy initiatives, or if they caused obstruction or destruction of energy infrastructure, I had grounds to renegotiate or even terminate the contract. And solar panels, ironically enough, counted as energy infrastructure. Sure, my personal panels might not be large enough to supply the entire neighborhood, but the clause clearly recognized them as an advanced renewable system. If the HOA was actively destroying or banning them, they were in direct violation of the contract. I could prove it in court if needed. Now, I'm not a vindictive person by nature, but I also believe in justice. Brenda had escalated this with violence, and the HOA was turning a blind eye. If they wanted to enforce petty rules against me, I was going to invoke real legal and financial repercussions. But before I made any moves, I hired a private investigator to do some digging on Brenda. I had a hunch she wasn't always squeaky clean. People don't usually resort to brazen vandalism if they've got a pristine record. Over the years, she'd probably thrown her weight around plenty, and I wanted a clear sense of her vulnerabilities. Next, I set up a meeting with an attorney friend who specialized in contracts. When I showed her the co-op agreement, she let out a low whistle. "This is ironclad, Arthur. If you can document that the HOA directly destroyed part of your renewable system and then threatened you for having it, you could rattle their entire power structure." Pun fully intended. That was all I needed to hear. For the first time since the fiasco began, a sense of calm washed over me. In the days that followed, I steeled myself for confrontation, letting the HOA's official notices arrive in my mailbox. They racked up a litany of ridiculous charges: daily fines for visual disturbance, a separate fine for failure to remove damaged materials, and even threats to place a lien on my house if I didn't comply by the end of the month. I almost laughed at the irony as I read each threatening letter. Brenda was about to learn the hard way that messing with an electrical engineer who quietly owned the local grid wasn't a winning strategy. What she assumed was a powerless retiree was, in fact, the one holding the switch. The next steps were all about gathering proof. I installed discrete security cameras around my property, angled to catch any approach to the new replacement solar panels I'd ordered. Yes, I planned to reinstall them and with significantly beefed-up mounting brackets. If Brenda tried to break these, she'd have to use a blowtorch or a small wrecking ball, and I'd have everything on video. In the meantime, the private investigator came back with a fascinating find. Brenda had once lived in an upscale neighborhood just 20 miles south of here. According to property records, she'd been forced out by a lawsuit after repeatedly harassing her neighbors and incurring thousands in fines herself. It appeared she had a pattern: become HOA president, or at least a senior board member, then micromanage everyone's lives until her authority was challenged. Then she turned nasty. Eventually, the community banded together to remove her, at which point she moved on. She was, in essence, a serial HOA tyrant. Armed with this knowledge, I felt more confident than ever about my plan. The moment my replacement panels were installed, I let the HOA know through official channels, of course. I submitted a formal application for the solar array, making it clear that the city had already approved the design. Predictably, Brenda rejected it immediately, citing the same worn-out bylaw about historical continuity. By the time her rejection letter landed in my mailbox, I was ready to deliver a shock of my own: a cease and desist notice drafted by my attorney, informing the HOA that they were in direct violation of the local power co-op's contractual terms. It demanded that Brenda, acting on behalf of the HOA, cease any actions to hinder or destroy my solar installation or face immediate legal and contractual consequences. I hand-delivered it to the HOA office. Stephen Miller looked pale as a ghost when I dropped the envelope on his desk. "Arthur, what is this? You're threatening to terminate the neighborhood's power supply." "I'm not threatening anything," I said calmly. "But the contract is clear. If the HOA continues to obstruct renewable energy infrastructure, the co-op can terminate its agreement. That means your locked-in power rates will be nullified, and the grid can charge market rates potentially triple or quadruple what you pay now. Or worse, we can cut service altogether until a new contract is negotiated. Stephen's eyes flickered with genuine panic. You can't do that. Can I? I just nodded. I own the majority shares of the co-op, so I certainly can, if forced. I'd rather not. But Brenda left me with no choice. He began flipping through the pages, his lips moving silently as he read the legal jargon. By the time he looked up, tiny beads of sweat glistened on his forehead. He muttered something about setting up an emergency meeting with the HOA board. That night, I slept the best I had in weeks. Until about midnight, when a neighbor texted me, "Power's out. Everything okay?" I rolled out of bed, confused. My battery backup for the house was humming along just fine, so I hadn't noticed a citywide outage. A quick check online showed no reported utility issues. Then, I glanced at my security monitors. There was a flicker of movement near my new panels. I bolted outside, expecting the worst, but found no visible damage. My cameras caught a shadowy figure, but the image was too grainy to identify who it was. They seemed to fiddle with something near the wiring, then scurried away. Fortunately, I'd installed an anti-tampering box and a heavy lock, so they'd done little more than yank on a cable. As I stood there under the pale moonlight, I realized the irony. The neighborhood's lights were out, but my house was still running on stored solar power. And that's when it struck me. Someone might be trying to sabotage my system to create an outage that they could blame on me. Or maybe it was Brenda, pulling a last-ditch intimidation move. I decided to speed up my timetable. The next morning, I contacted my attorney to finalize the notice of contract termination, setting a grace period of 1 week for the HOA to comply with the cease and desist. By mid-afternoon, I learned from a friend on the HOA board that the emergency meeting had erupted in chaos. People were furious at Brenda, particularly the older residents who lived on fixed incomes. The idea of skyrocketing power rates or losing electricity altogether was terrifying. They wanted an immediate compromise, if only to avoid financial disaster. Brenda, of course, was defiant. She reportedly called me a bully and insisted I was bluffing. But with no evidence to back her claim, and with the board members passing around copies of my co-op contract, her authority was slipping. On the 7th day of the grace period, I was at my computer, prepared to finalize the contract termination that would effectively shut down or drastically reduce power to the neighborhood. My phone rang. A frantic Stephen Miller. "Arthur, the board just voted," he wheezed. "We'll lift the ban on your panels, withdraw all fines, and reimburse you for any damages. Just please don't terminate our agreement." I leaned back in my chair, staring at the yard through the window. I could see the new solar panels silently soaking up the sun. Finally, it felt like justice was near. "Brenda agrees to this?" I asked. He exhaled shakily. She was outvoted. They replaced her as president with Eleanor Hayes. She's stepping down, but she warned she might sue or do something else. "But the board wants to meet your demands. Will you sign a new contract that maintains our rates?" A swirl of satisfaction and relief overcame me. "Yes, on condition that Brenda personally apologizes and covers my out-of-pocket expenses for the panels. Also, the HOA board must adopt a revised bylaw allowing solar installations that meet city standards. No future homeowner should go through what I did." Silence. Then he muttered, "I'll bring that to them. But could you please hold off any drastic action until we sort it out?" I gave him a measured response. 48 hours. After that, lights out. He thanked me profusely and hung up. In the meantime, I let my attorney know that the HOA was finally backing down. That very evening, I received a letter via email, ostensibly from Brenda, refusing to apologize and threatening to make sure you regret stepping into this neighborhood. Typical. I felt a twist of anger in my gut. She was doubling down, even in defeat, refusing to sign the new bylaw or cover my damages. How many times had she gotten her way by intimidating people? How many neighbors had cowered before her and paid fines they didn't deserve? I gazed at my phone, tapping my finger against the contract termination button that would signal the co-op to cut or severely restrict power. The board was willing to negotiate, but Brenda was not. And if she remained an influential voice, even from behind the scenes, she might stall their final vote. A small voice inside me said, "If you do this, you'll become a monster in their eyes." But I brushed it aside. Sometimes, a show of real power is the only way to reign in someone who only respects force. I poured a cup of tea, watched the sun dip below the horizon, and waited for the next morning to see if cooler heads would prevail at the HOA. If not, I was prepared to flip the switch figuratively and literally. Morning arrived with a crispness in the air, the kind that signals the end of a humid summer and the start of cooler days. I checked my email, half expecting to see a resolution from the HOA. Instead, there was nothing but the usual junk mail. No apology from Brenda, no official updates on the bylaw revision. I called Stephen Miller, but it went straight to voicemail. Anxiety began to creep in. So, I made a decision. If they were going to hide their heads in the sand, I'd force their hand. I got in my truck and drove to the co-op's distribution station, a small, nondescript building on the edge of town where the main feed for the neighborhood was routed. Inside, I nodded to the security guard and showed my credentials as a majority shareholder. Technicians came and went, adjusting control panels and reading meters. I found a quiet corner office with a large console display that tracked usage across the area. My co-op manager, a grizzled fellow named Mike, greeted me with a crooked grin. "So," he said, tapping the screen that showed the neighborhood's load. "Are we pulling the plug?" I hesitated. I could see the lines representing thousands of kilowatt-hours used daily: air conditioners, refrigerators, medical equipment, lights to keep families safe in the evenings. None of those folks had destroyed my panels. Most of them hadn't voted to keep solar out. They were just neighbors, many too timid or too busy to fight Brenda. But maybe losing power would push them to stand up to the tyrant themselves. After all, if she was the reason they were losing electricity, they wouldn't stay quiet for long. I turned to Mike. "We'll do a partial restriction. We're not plunging anyone into darkness at once. We'll reduce the supply capacity, so lights might flicker or air conditioners won't run at full tilt. Enough to send a message. And do it in increments. Every hour, cut capacity by 10%. He nodded, entering commands. Understood. Then, with my heart pounding, I confirmed the directive. A part of me felt a pang of guilt, but another part knew that I'd tried every legal path, and the HOA had ignored me. Brenda, in particular, refused any compromise. About 30 minutes later, my phone lit up with a call from an unknown number. I answered, hearing frantic voices in the background. "Mr. Vance?" a woman's voice asked, sounding out of breath. "This is he. It's Eleanor Hayes, the new interim HOA president. I'm at the HOA office, and we're getting complaints from all over the neighborhood. Power's flickering on and off. Some houses say the voltage is too low to run major appliances. Are you behind this?" I let a brief silence hang. "Eleanor, I gave you all a chance to fix this amicably. Last I heard, Brenda refused to apologize or pay for what she destroyed. I told you what would happen." She stammered. "Brenda's locked herself in her house. She's threatening to sue the board if we remove her from any committees. She's also making calls to the county to try to get you reported for extortion or something. The board voted to comply with your demands, but she's refusing to sign the official paperwork. She's calling it invalid." Outside the window of the co-op, I could see the bright sun shining on the distant horizon. "Well, Eleanor, you've got two options. Figure out a way around Brenda's obstruction, or watch the neighborhood's power degrade until it's effectively off. You've got about 3 hours until the supply hits critical, then everything goes dark." She pleaded, "Isn't there another way? This is punishing innocent families." I almost wavered, but I recalled Brenda's sneer, her baton smashing my property, and the HOA's endless fines. "Sometimes," I said, "a community needs to stand up to a bully. If you can't do it through your bylaws, maybe you do it another way." She was quiet, and I heard faint sobs in the background. "Neighbors in the office, perhaps." "All right," she said finally, a grim determination in her voice. "We'll get it done. Just please give us a chance." I gave them those 3 hours. No more. Each hour, the console beeped, and Mike dialed down the capacity another notch. By the time 2 hours had passed, my phone was blowing up. Voicemails, texts, pictures flooded social media of people's dimming lights, powerless TV screens, and neighbors sitting on front steps, fanning themselves in the midday heat. I felt like a villain, but I was also certain that the person truly responsible was Brenda. Finally, a text from Eleanor. Brenda's out. She resigned from all HOA responsibilities. We have an agreement that includes your reimbursement. Sending it now. Please restore power. I read the attached PDF on my phone. An official resolution from the HOA board, signed by every remaining member. It 1. Recognized my right to have solar panels. 2. Agreed to reimburse me for damages incurred. 3. Invited residents to apply for solar installations under newly relaxed guidelines. And 4. Removed Brenda Sharp from any current or future leadership roles due to her vandalism and intimidation. There was even a note that she had to write a formal apology to me, though it was worded in a carefully neutral way. They did it, I said under my breath. Then I turned to Mike. Go ahead. Restore the normal feed. And keep a close eye on it in case Brenda tries some stunt. He typed in a series of commands, and a moment later, the console showed the power flow ramping back up to full capacity. I imagined lights across the neighborhood brightening and air conditioners roaring back to life, even as I stuffed the phone into my pocket. On my drive home, I passed by the clubhouse. A small crowd was gathered, many of them older folks who looked relieved and also furious presumably at Brenda. As I pulled up to my driveway, I noticed a golf cart for sale sign on Brenda's front lawn, a hastily scrawled sign reading $500 OBO. The house's windows were dark, and her prized hydrangeas looked wilted. She'd been dethroned. Over the following weeks, the neighborhood adapted surprisingly well to the new solar-friendly policies. A few residents even asked for my help in selecting their own solar setups. Though the memory of that partial power shutdown left some folks uneasy, many understood why it happened. A few privately thanked me for standing up to Brenda in a way they never could. As for Brenda herself, she sulked in her house for a while, then quietly put it up for sale. Rumor had it that she left under the cover of night, loading a U-Haul with her things. No dramatic farewell, no final confrontation, just the silent departure of someone who'd lost their stranglehold on a community. In the end, justice had a cost, and I felt guilty for those who'd lost power during my standoff. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it was the only language a bully like Brenda understood. The moment she realized I literally held the switch, her house of cards collapsed. Now, I sip coffee on my back porch each morning, admiring the sleek rows of solar panels that gleam in the sunshine. The yard is peaceful, the early birds chirp, and there's no more baton-wielding tyrant prowling around. The HOA has even talked about turning an unused common area into a community solar farm so more people can benefit from clean energy. It's progress, real progress, born out of a messy conflict. Sometimes, you have to be the one to flip the breaker on the status quo. It's not pretty or comfortable, but when someone's used to having absolute power, they never expect you to hold the bigger switch. Brenda learned that the hard way. And as the sun climbs higher, powering my house from those bright panels, I can't help but smile at the satisfying hum of electricity that's truly mine, free of the HOA's meddling. I'm no hero. I just happen to be the right kind of neighbor to face down the wrong kind of bully. And if she ever tries to resurface with her baton in some other unsuspecting neighborhood, I hope there's another Arthur Vance out there, ready to pull the plug. Because every tyrant eventually meets the one fuse they can't blow. And in this case, that was me.